Enactivism and Cognitive Semiotics. We kindly ask you to just turn your camera and your microphone off, and then when this discussion will start, you just can ask to be empowered and to have the right to speak and show yourself. And then we will do that. So for today, it's a great pleasure to have here Lambros Malafouris and Maria Danae Koukouti from the University of Oxford. It's also we told that from the very beginning of the works of our center that we will pay special attention to also the books that are coming out connected to enactivism, to cognitive semiotics, and all that. We did that with the book by Sean Gallagher, Action Interaction, with my book on cognitive semiotics, and now with the book co-authored by Lambros Malafouris and Maria Danae Koukouti, that is The Art and the Philosophy of Mirror Gazing. That is just went out. It's some weeks, so it's brand new. I think you all know Lambros Malafouris, who is associate professor in cognitive archaeology at the University of Oxford, and also fellow at the Keble College of the University of Oxford. You all know that Lambros is working since many years on the interaction between cognition and material culture, also with a special attention to the effects of materiality in human cognitive life. He is the main, you all know, his proposal of a material engagement theory, keeping together the idea of the extended mind, or the inactive science, and of material agency. And also, you know that Lambros is the principal investigator of an important ERC project that is called Handmade, Understanding Creative Gesture in Pottery Making, granted by the European Commission. And Maria Danae Koukouti, who is a research assistant at in the Institute of Archaeology at the University of Oxford, is a collaborator of the Handmade project. So she works together with Lambros at the project, and she mainly is an anthropologist, but she works on narratives, on visual culture, so many topics. And they wrote together these beautiful books that we want to discuss and we want to introduce and present here in the International Center. So thank you very much once again for being here, Lambros and Danae. So I leave you the word. So I think that Danae will be first. So thank you so much, Danae, and we shut up and we listen to you.
Thank you, Claudio. Just one moment to say one thing to help also the audience understand the process a bit. First, one small correction. I was at Kimball for the past 10 years. I'm now at Hartford College since July. Just this small correction in terms of my biography. And just also to say that the presentation today, as you said, also is based on the new book that I have been writing for a long time now with Danae. And as you nicely introduced it by way of an activist, it has an activist spirit. It's not an activist in the philosophical, if you want, sense of the term. And analytically speaking, it's more an anthropology of the mirror image rather than a philosophy of it. And I hope that this perhaps will make it also more interesting to philosophers to see and to get some ideas about how we could see this phenomenon from a more anthropological angle, rather a more phenomenological or analytical angle, although, you know, as always, we are trying to blend the two. And Danae will be starting with the first part of the presentation. I will continue in the second part. And at the end, of course, we will take any question from the audience. So that's all. Thanks a lot so much for this opportunity to present our work and for inviting us. And thanks everybody who will be attending the meeting. Danae.
Hello. Hello, everybody. It's very nice to see you all, and thank you very much, Claudio, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak about our new book. I will begin with a few questions. What does it mean to look in the mirror? What is the agency of this object? What does it do to us? How does it affect our self-perception and self-identity? Do all people look in the mirror in the same way? How many ways are there? Our aim in this presentation is to provide a comparative anthropological inquiry of what it is to look and find oneself in the mirror. We call it the art or skill of mirror self-identification. It is a way of knowing things, an episteme, as it is a way of doing things, techne. We insist on integrating knowing and doing because this integration of thought and action provides the primary stuff for a good relational ontology. And a good relational ontology is essential for our anthropological analysis. Our intent is critical and comparative. We adopt an anthropological approach primarily because we want to disturb and estrange the familiar habits of looking so that new connections and patterns of juxtaposition may emerge. A distinctive feature of anthropological inquiry can be seen in the way it reveals the constant tension between similarity and difference as it can be observed in various forms of human biosocial becoming. The practice of mirror gazing is not an exception. Technically, we approach mirroring as a visual form of material engagement. We are interested to explore how the mirror affects human perception, our modes of attention, and self-transformation. Mirror self-identification is an acquired skill, something we all learn as children, growing up in a particular historical situation. This is why we propose that the art of mirror gazing involves a great deal of unlearning. Take, for instance, our shared conviction that the mirror is a solid reflective surface rather than a forward extension of space. This conviction demands and predisposes us to look at the mirror rather than through it. But what would happen if we were instead to look through the mirror as if it was transparent? Taking such a step requires a perspectival understanding of the world, which allows for ontological multiplicity, that is, the possibility that there is more than a single reality to see in the mirror, more than one world to navigate, and more than one story to tell. Talk about ontologies is indeed increasingly fashionable among anthropologists these days. We will not take issue with the theoretical debate surrounding new materialism and the so-called ontological term. Rather, we use the term ontology in a very basic sense. It denotes a coincidental form of comparative anthropological inquiry that aims to expose what it is that matters of certain transparent phenomena that may otherwise pass unnoticed or be mischaracterized as elusive or merely imaginary. We are interested to understand how the mirror matters and to illustrate some of the possible ways by which the mirror comes to matter. Tackling this ontological pluralism of looking in the mirror, we have tried, in the book, to set out a creative juxtaposition of stories of mirror gazing, taking inspiration from Gregory Bateson's thesis of connectedness. To assemble and narrate stories of mirroring in a manner that respects and highlights their ontological proximity and multiplicity is not an easy task. It demands delicate use of metaphor, comparison, and estrangement. Metaphor will allow us to conceptualize the unfamiliar through the familiar. Comparison will permit us to reconceptualize two familiar things in the light of each other. And estrangement will be used to turn the familiar into unfamiliar and then to resituate the unfamiliar in the very heart of our ordinary habitual life. Now let's start with the basics. We take it here that most of us know what it is to look like in the mirror and assume that under normal conditions, we can all recognize ourselves in it. Indeed, once we get to know it and come to trust its surface, the mirror is a self-explanatory device. It attracts our gaze and performs its mimetic function, what we call here the mirroring, asking nothing in return. We don't need to know why or how it works, and we do not need to do anything to make it work. It simply does. In fact, it works so well that other species can use it if they are given the opportunity. However, as it is often the case with most mimetic creatures, natural or artificial, this simplicity is misleading. Looking in the mirror and finding ourselves in the mirror are two different things. As the developmental psychologist Philip Rosat explains, mirror reflection of the self is paradoxical in the sense that what is seen in the mirror is the self as another person. The mirroring is enchanting because quite unnaturally it allows the eye to perform a function deemed useless by natural selection. That is, to gaze at one's own image. To look at our face in the mirror is to gaze directly at that part of the human body that we are not supposed to see, even that is our face, of course, even though it is probably the part we associate with human subjectivity more than any other. Yet, looking in the mirror is what we now constantly do. Let me explain something here. The mirror might not be the object we know and is placed on the wall. In our days, the mirror image might be a digital one. It might be the mirror app on our smartphone, the digital mirror in a mirror selfie that we take and we share with others. We may watch the image of our face as we Skype to a friend, or as I can do right now. I mean, here I am, I can see my face at the screen of this laptop as I'm talking to you. Now, this is something I would not be able to do where we were really together physically in one of these lovely rooms at the University of Bologna. I wouldn't be aware of how I look right now that I'm looking at my image. And of course, so can you if you look at your self-image at a mirror screen. So my point is, never before have our self-image been so visible, recorded, or circulated. How our daily engagement with this image, our self-image, affects now our self-perception and self-identity? To answer, we will take a different, more critical anthropological stance towards the mirror. If the mirror is an active participant in our daily routines of self-identification, then we ask, how does it do it? Perhaps we can start by saying that the mirroring is confusing because it is an illusion that cannot lie. On the one hand, what we see in the mirror is nothing but a phantom image of our body standing against the background of a solid surface. But on the other hand, as semiotician Umberto Eco observes, once we have acknowledged that what we perceive is a mirror image, we always begin from the principle that the mirror tells the truth. If you want to explore further this perceptual confusion, we suggest you try a simple mirror gazing exercise originally proposed by the famous art historian Ernst Gombrich. That is, next time you happen to look on a fogged up mirror, let's say of your bathroom, you should try circle the outline of your head with your finger on the mirror. Then come closer and measure the length of the outline that you have just produced, and you will notice something very strange. The length of the outline of your reflected head is actually half the size of your real head. This misconception is simple. The mirror is always placed halfway between us and the reflection that we see. Yet, it always seems to surprise us. We have learned to think of ourselves as agents who have mastery and control over the mirror image. But, as Hans Belting points out, we have never been the masters of our mirror images, but rather, in a sense, at their mercy. Now, how can this be? How can it be that the mirror image that leads the life of a shadow to exert any kind of control over us? To answer that question, we need to understand better the cognitive life of the mirror image. That is, we need to understand what are the distinctive qualities of mirroring as a form of self-imaging. Let me begin by noting that the mirror image brings about a peculiar set of constraints for looking and making sense of the world. First, a subject-object separation that reiterates a false dilemma between reality and appearance, and second, a sense of control of the subject over the object that reiterates the illusions of agency. A mirror cannot mirror anything before a subject is able and willing to identify its reflection in it. Yet, a peculiarity of the mirror is that the subject gazing in the mirror and the object inside are one and the same. The semiotic conflation blurs, if not cancels entirely, the distance between subject and object and creates a vacuum of agency that needs to be filled. Mirror images do not travel. That's another characteristic. Only mirrors do. As Umberto Eco again wrote, as long as I can look at it, it gives me back my facial features, but if I mailed a mirror which I have long looked at to my beloved, so that she may remember my looks, she could not see me, and would instead see herself. That, of course, does not mean that the mirror image lacks in movement. Quite the contrary. The mirror image moves in perfect synchronicity with our own bodily movements. As long as we stay in front of the looking glass, the mirror is staying with us. The moment we look away, that image disappears as if nothing ever existed on the mirror surface. Which brings us to another characteristic. Our mirror body vanishes without leaving any visible trace on the mirror surface. No trace, no memory. That means we can never remember a mirroring. We remember photographs, portraits, videos. We even remember images that we saw in our dreams. But we don't seem to recall any specific encounters with our specular image. That is, the mirror image is slippery. It does not attach itself to memory. The mirror image has no memory. It is no memory either. That is because, unlike the products of other mimetic machines and media, be it photography, video, or painting, our mirrored reflection is not a thing created, not at least in the common sense of creativity that we associate with form making. A self-portrait, to give one obvious example, will take time, effort, and skill. Our mirror image involves nothing of that. There is no complex intentionality or elaborate act of creation. There is only light and a very humble piece of glass. Lacking a tangible physical presence also means that the mirror image cannot be dated, exhibited, or shared. Viewing our idol in the mirror is a transient and lonely experience. What's more, the mirroring cannot migrate to another medium, it cannot be printed or broadcasted. Now let me make another note here. In our days, there is the mirror selfie. That is a digital image of our mirror reflection that we can store and share in social media. The mirror selfie indeed bestowed the mirroring with the power to invade photography and to escape the narrow confines of its glass. But that is, of course, a different and very long story that merits its own analysis as part of the bigger picture of digital self-representation and social media. Here, allow us to focus on the self-image inside the mirror, and that image provides an unmediated visual copy of what it represents. It signifies a natural occurrence. Specifically, the mirror offers a meeting place where two occurrences, that of our living body, the image referent, and that of our mirrored body, the mirror image, momentarily intertwine. One peculiar characteristic of this meeting between mirror image and its referent is that, unlike other signifying relations, it is based on synchronicity and co-presence. The referent, that is our body, must be present for the mirror image to occur. Indeed, one of the most striking things about a mirror is the perfect temporal contingency between the viewing individual's movement and those of the reflection. Unlike conventional signs and images, there cannot be a mirror image in the absence of its causative referent. Our body reflected in the mirror is the product of theft or abduction. We may construct a mirror and we may cause our mirroring by situating our body in front of the mirror, and of course by turning our gaze at it. But the mirror image itself is not affected by human intention. Rather, it is the other way around. We are caught by the mirror and we are drawn into it. Umberto Eco also refers to the mirror image as a theft of the image. He writes, "The fact that the mirror image is a most peculiar case of double and has the traits of a unique case explains why mirrors inspired so much literature. This virtual duplication of stimuli, which sometimes works as if there were a duplication of both my body as an object and my body as a subject, splitting and facing itself, this theft of an image, this uneasy temptation to believe I am someone else, makes a man's experience with mirrors an absolutely unique one on the threshold between perception and signification." The self-contradictory character of the mirror image has always been something of a paradox. Its ambivalent ontology, being and at the same time not being, has been the main source of its enchantment as a mode of representation. Our engagement with a mirror and the product of this engagement eludes our familiar taxonomies and categories. Apparently, the mirroring lacks the usual traits we associate with other images and type of imagery. Indeed, if images, as William Mitchell notes, are enigmas, prison houses which lock away the understanding from the world, then the mirroring are even more so. To get a better sense of the mirroring, therefore, is not enough to ask just what it is. We should also ask, what does it do? How does it behave? It is on the social and psychological level that mirrors reveal their true power. Presenting us with the reflected image of ourselves, mirrors are turned into what philosopher Michel Foucault describes as technologies of the self. We propose there are at least three distinctive ways by which the mirror image is gaining its influence and achieves the impact. That is, by lying to us, by mimicking our actions, and by clinging on stubbornly to a sort of pre-modern enchantment. So let us begin with the first one, the first characteristic, the lying to us. Simply put, mirrors are tricksters, illusionist devices. The illusion of transparency that they give is the exact opposite of what they really are. Maybe made by various materials, polished metal surfaces or silver glass, the mirror's main characteristic is that they do not absorb light. Mirrors are actually perfectly opaque objects, usually flat, polished, and they reflect light. In physical terms, mirrors are obstacles to light. Unlike the photographic camera that is made to capture light, mirrors obstruct it. Specifically, mirrors invert light's direction in space, but maintain its structure so that we will still perceive the optic array. Because of that, mirrors are extremely useful epistemic object and prosthetic means. They are used for many purposes, like microscopes, telescopes, or surgical equipment. Here, however, we are especially concerned with the role that mirrors play as an instrument for the acquisition of self-knowledge. In this context, mirrors are better understood as objects of visual and perceptual trickery, sympathy and affect. Mirrors have been lying to us so loudly and for so long that the lie has become in the end invincible. Even as we know that mirrors are perfectly opaque when they appear transparent, or that our mirroring is half the size of our real body, we still refuse to see it. We are, it seems, unable to become aware of the mirror's illusion. And what's more, why should we care? Mimicry is the second compelling characteristic of the mirror image. It gives to it the illusion of life. The mirror double not only changes postures and moves like images in film, but it does so in front of us, mimicking the present sense of our physical self. The representational mobility of the mirroring is of a distinctive kind. Unlike the cinematic image, neither sound nor images of the past are transmitted through the mirror to distant places and distant people. The mirror image is like a mime, a silent and rooted presence. The mirror image also does not invade time, like the photographic image or a portrait. It does not travel from past to present, and therefore it cannot offer us rescue from oblivion, any kind of technical life after death. Also, the experience of mirror gazing does not end by pressing the stop button or a video recorder. Time is not arrested in front of the mirror. Time is lived through. Still, mimicry makes the mirror image more alive than any other image. That brings us now to the third characteristic of the mirror, the enchantment. The mirror presents us with a perfect illusion of bilocation. That is, the feeling of being present in more than one place at a time. This challenges our perception. Let's not forget that the ability to gaze into our own eyes is a prosthetic ability rather than a feature of human biology. We are, of course, perfectly familiar with looking at our mirror reflection, and yet there remains an oddity, a split between I and me, between our physical self and our self-image. According to Ronald Barthes, before the invention of photography, the vision of our photographic double had been a major source of enchantment, often related to hallucinosis. But today, he argues, it is as if we repressed the profound madness of photography. It reminds us of its mythical heritage only by that faint uneasiness which seizes me when I look at myself on a piece of paper. The mirror image can also be profoundly unsettling, perhaps even more so than photography. We have learned, of course, to forget the profound madness of the mirror as well. Still, even more than the photographic image, the mirroring, with its live mimicry, often reminds us something of the original unease and fear that the experience of seeing our double outside of our bodies always embodies. The presence of the mirror, our knowledge of this artifact, matches the vision with reasonable explanation. Nevertheless, staring at our staring face may become, after a while, uncomfortable. But how would it be to look at our mirror double without any previous knowledge of this object that we call the mirror? There are some very rare anthropological occasions which offer us the opportunity to observe similar existential transition in small communities unhabituated to mirrors and self-images. There, the fear of self-bilocation can be observed in its natural context. We can witness one of those rare ethnographic instances following the anthropologist Edmund Carpenter to the territory of Papua New Guinea in the southwest Pacific. Carpenter, a leading figure in visual anthropology and a close collaboration to media theorist Marshall McLuhan, found himself in an extraordinary place. During the period of his study, that is 1969-1970, Papua New Guinea was still one of those most unique territories where for many people the still-axe, transistor radio and camera arrived together. As Carpenter characteristically observes, Post Moresby, the capital of the eastern section, resembles a southern Californian town with air-conditioned buildings, supermarkets, and a drive-in theater. 400 miles to the west, tiny isolated bands practice cannibalism. The bulk of the population lies between these extremes, living in thousands of tiny villages and speaking over 700 different languages. What happens, Carpenter wondered, when a person for the first time sees himself in the mirror in a photograph or on screen? One of the isolated tribes that Carpenter had the opportunity to study was the Bayami of the Papuan Plateau. The Bayami tribe lived in a place of murky rivers and were otherwise unfamiliar with any metallic or slate reflecting surfaces. Now, the murky river, of course, the murky rivers is an important observation because it means that these people had never seen the reflection, not even in a still and clear water of the lake. Carpenter reports the existence of coin-sized scraps of mirrors, but they were too small to give self-reflections and valued only as light reflectors. As one may have expected, eyes innocent to the specular image would experience dissonance and some confusion. But in this instance, what Carpenter observed seems much more radical. Carpenter described the reaction of the people of the Bayami tribe to the mirror as one of acute anxiety, confusion, and terror. In his own words, they were paralyzed. After the first startled response, covering their mouth and ducking their heads, they stood transfixed, staring at their image. Only their stomach muscles betrayed their tension. Unable to move, the anxiety of Carpenter's subjects became evident only by the trembling bodies. It was as if they had vomited up an organ. They covered their mouth and ducked their heads almost as a delayed reflex, trying to prevent this. So what was the cause of this not ordinary fear? According to Carpenter's interpretation, the mirror image exposed a second symbolic self to the subjects, one that being outside of their bodies and the protected space of the physical self was made public and therefore vulnerable. Of course, this challenge to self-localization was only very temporary. Habit alleviates the terror of bilocation. The members of the Bayami tribe, after a few days of contact with the mirror, were seen grooming themselves casually in front of it. When mirrors become a part of daily life, it is easy to forget how frightening self-discovery, self-awareness can be. Habit eliminates the frightening and mesmerizing quieting of the mirror. Still, it does not take away completely the fascination of gazing at ourselves, of seeing our eyes in front of us. As we've said, the mirror clings to a sort of pre-modern enchantment. It does not let go of this ability it has to mesmerize us. The mirror's enchantment primarily emanates from its unique ability to integrate within the same temporal framework a series of casual transactions that encompass aesthetical and magical elements. Unlike other images and representational media, the captivating power of the mirror as a technology of enchantment does not stem from its ability to serve as an index of technical efficacy. Rather, it primarily emanates from the suggested intertwining of the lived phenomenal body and its visible synchronous representation on the mirror's surface. With mirroring, the image or ourself, the image of ourself is both presented and represented. Indeed, some forms of everyday technology retain the power to make us see the world as a more magical place, and the mirror is one of these objects. And as anthropologist Alfred Zell writes, the enchantment of technology, which is inherent in all kinds of technical processes, is a force that influences our emotion and behavior, mainly by making us act in a manner incomprehensible. So we ask, how does the mirror influences our emotions and our behavior? First of all, it is the main trait of the mirror to make us aware of ourselves by making our bodies visible. By mirror gazing, we become aware of how we look like in comparison to other people, as well as how other people might judge our appearance. As social creatures, we want our mirroring to conform to our expectations of how we should look like in the eyes of the other. The ontogenic origins of this basic relationship between mirror gazing and our need to fit in had been demonstrated also experimentally. In particular, young children, 14 to 52 months, response to the mirror mark test was explored in different social contexts to see whether normative factors such as the need to match the appearance of the self to the appearance of others may influence children's mirror self-recognition behavior. The experimental procedure entailed two major conditions. In the first condition, yellow post-it stickers were placed only on the forehead of children. Most children, looking in the mirror now with these stickers on their head, passed the test, demonstrating a tendency to touch and remove the mark of their forehead. So they understood that they had this post-it sticker and they tried to pull it out. In the second condition now, everyone in the room, the child, experimenter, and accompanying parent, were marked prior to the child mirror exposure with similar post-it stickers on their forehead. Children were now less likely to touch or remove their mark, often putting it back on their forehead in an apparent attempt at conforming with the social norm established in the testing room. What this finding suggests is that children passing the mark test do not construe the mirror reflection solely in terms of its reference to the embodied self, but are also capable of construing such reflection in reference to how others might perceive and evaluate them. Cognition, Philippe Rosat and Dan Zahavi write, is not the only thing involved in the mirror experience, but also a sensitivity and awareness of evaluative others as well as conformity to perceived social norms, what is allowed or promoted by the culture and what is not. The manifestation of mirror self-recognition, at least in humans, always involves others. A labor of self-presentation, self-correction, of public appearance, all signs of normative conformity, and the trademarks of the mirror self-experience. One common fallacy about the mirror is to think that they simply hang there on the wall. We argue that there is no such thing as a freestanding mirror. Our social and historical situation holds the mirror and determines what we actually see in it. As many people know from experience, mirror gazing can turn into a diminishing and abusing affair. We are now referring to a way of looking which is cast in the mirror to compare our self-reflection with beauty stereotypes promoted mostly by advertising and beauty industry. That is to say, instead of trying to come to know our appearance and appreciate ourselves in the mirror, we seek to find out if we look young, fashionable, or attractive. We judge our image in relation to this plethora of perfect images that are circulated in advertising and social media. As a result, when we try to correct our not so perfect self as a result, we then try to correct this not so perfect image, not so perfect self that we see in the mirror by investing time and money into buying expensive products or cosmetic procedures that are supposed to make us look better. Laura Clark and Meredith Griffin speak of an irony very much to the point. The irony of the woman's perception of being invisible as a result of the visibility of their visibly aged appearances. That is, as signs of aging become visible on their skins, women, as well as men, might start to fear that they are becoming socially invisible. Understandably, engaging with a mirror enhances that fear and enables beauty industry to immediately capitalize on that fear. Young and beautiful bodies, on the other hand, are voraciously publicized and consumed by popular culture. As Kathleen Woodward observes, institutionalized gazing at youth, for example in mass media, is underpinned by the cultural assumption that physical beauty itself is premised on youthfulness and denied to older people. Being convinced that to feel happy and lovable you must look young and sexually attractive produces a serious conflict between person and mirror and undermines our self-identity. Not looking young becomes a sort of not looking like our true self, the true self now being hidden somewhere within all skill and is realized as a state in which the body is in opposition with itself. Under these terms, one could end up feeling alienated from one's mirrored body. Now, gaining knowledge and self-awareness from mirror gazing becomes unlikely, while looking in the mirror might turn into a very painful experience. Should we try just not caring if we are getting older? Should we try not caring how we look to other people? It would be very easy to dismiss our need to appear youthful and attractive and lovable in the mirror as vanity, or as a tendency to be accepted and liked, or the tendency to be accepted and liked as a weakness of our character. But the truth is that, as Philip Rosat said, we are a self-conscious species. We struggle for social acceptance and inclusion by endless attempts at influencing what others see in us, think of us, represent of us. It is an all-too-human propensity that cuts across people and cultures. We are obsessed with the idea of what is public about us, obsessed with the representation other people might have of us. That means that others are important. Without others, we would not be. As infants, we would not have survived. As adults, we would not have any explicit sense of who we are. We would have no ability nor any inclination to be self-conscious. Banishing the mirror is not a solution either, even though there are some very popular websites and influencers that suggest that we should ban the mirror. We find it a bit ridiculous, to be honest, because first of all, the mirror, as I've said earlier, in our days is not waiting for us on the wall. It's not voluntary to see our self-image. It's not voluntary to see how we look to others. Our mirror-like reflection exists on items we could never get rid of, like my smartphone or my computer screen. Seeing our mirroring, then, and coming to terms with our ever-changing image is something that we cannot escape. We have reached now the second part of our talk that I will pass on to Lambros, who will continue discussing the mirror as a trap. Lambro?
Yes, thank you, Danae. I understand. It's better if you turn off your mic, Danae, I think. I'm getting, so? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm not sure how we are doing with time. I will try to keep the remaining of our talk within manageable limits. It will be probably 20 or 30 minutes, though. So hopefully that will give us some time also for the discussion of the questions. Okay, so as Danae said, for the second part of our presentation, we'll be focusing on the idea of mirror as trap, or the metaphor of mirror as trap. So the mimetic exchange that we discussed before now assumes the relation between hunter and prey. We ask you, in other words, to think of mirroring on a par with snaring. That is, to think of the mirror as a device for the remote capture of prey. First, a few things about traps. Traps are usually designed to catch particular animals. They target their habits and predict the ways they move in the landscape. A good trap, like a good hunter, is adapted to the distinctive features of its prey. Traps are silent, yet they do speak. They communicate in the language of material science. They communicate information about the animal's strengths and weaknesses. For instance, traps objectify relevant parts of the hunter's knowledge on the animal's whereabouts and activities, how they go about to discover food, water, or mates. It is no secret among hunters that the more the trap knows or remembers about the prey, the more effective it is. There are many kinds of traps, as there are many kinds of prey. What about the mirror then? How exactly does the mirror trap work? What creatures is it designed to catch? Who is the hunter and what is the prey? The argument we put forward in our book is that mirrors are traps especially designed for sentient creatures of the self-conscious kind. The major assumption is that the mirror trap enacts in the wild the same basic principles of the so-called mirror self-recognition test that, as mentioned before, has been used for studying self-identification in developmental and comparative animal psychology. In other words, the operation of the mirror trap is grounded on the ability of the mirror to act as a self-recognition device. We propose that the mirror resembles a powerful attractor within a semiotic field of subjectification. Specifically, the mirror trap operates primarily on the basis of mimesis, exchanging its prey by enacting a deep experiential I see me but not me paradox. Then can you move back 2 slides? I think you're ahead of me. Another one, back.
Actually, we don't see slides, or I don't see slides. I never saw any slides so far.
Okay, Claudio, are you also unable to see slides?
No, I can see them.
I see them too.
Okay, good.
I can see the slide without problems, so I don't know.
Okay, good. Okay, I will continue then. Perhaps even more important than understanding why mirrors can be seen to operate as traps is to see how traps often operate like mirrors. Traditional ethnographic accounts of hunting tell us that the use of traps is a common worldwide practice. From a functional point of view, the making and setting of traps is relatively simple, yet the idea of remote capture that those humble technologies embody is a complex one. Traps are more than smart hunting automata. The process of entrapment, seen as a mode of an active signification between the hunter and the prey, can potentially expose relations of broader anthropological significance. No one has expressed better this than Alfred Gell, who Danae already mentioned before, and whose work we would like to quote here at some length. We should explain that Gell's particular take on the agency of traps is guided by his radical anthropological theory of art. It is that theory, developed in full in his famous book Art and Agency, that allowed him a novel appreciation of traps as embodiments of complex intentionalities and thus potentially artworks. Developing his case of traps as artworks and artworks as traps, Gell makes many valuable points of particular relevance to our own present concern to develop an argument of traps as mirrors and mirrors as traps. Let's take, for instance, one of his examples, an arrow trap from Africa that you see in the slide now. At a basic level, the trap operates by mere association and substitution. The arrow trap is a substitute for its creator. It becomes a surrogate hunter, translating into its material design its owner's hunting skills, and Gell actually likens it to an automaton or robot. The trap, Gell writes, is equipped with a rudimentary sensory transducer, the cord which is sensitive to the animal's touch, and this afferent nervous system brings information to the automaton's central processor, which activates the efferent system, releasing the energy stored in the bow, which propels the arrows, which produce action at a distance, which eventually brings about the victim's death. Interestingly, not only trap delegates the hunter, it also signifies the victim. In some cases, traps may simply reflect the outward form of the victim or represent parameters of the animal's natural behavior, which is subverted in order to entrap it. Studying the form of a trap, one could infer a great deal about the character and dispositions of the intended victim. In this sense, Gell continues, traps can be regarded as text on animal behavior. The trap is therefore both a model of its creator, the hunter, and a model of its victim, the prey animal. But more than this, the trap embodies a scenario which is the dramatic nexus that binds these two protagonists together and which aligns them in time and space. Apart from the entanglement between hunter and prey and that the trap objectifies and mediates, there is also a semiotic double bind. To explain, on the one hand, the arrow trap, like all traps, is designed to be hidden. It can only fulfill its purpose if passed unnoticed. Traps are inherently secretive. As Gell observes, they are not designed to communicate anything but a deadly absence, the absence of the hunter who devised and set it, and the absence of the animal who will become the victim. On the other hand, the arrow trap, like all traps, because of these marked absences, function as powerful enactive signs able to signify without speaking through their material structure. The static violence, this is the previous slide, Danae, go one step back. The static violence of the tensed bow, the congealed malevolence of the arrangement of sticks and cords are revelatory in themselves without resource to conventionalization. Since this is a sign that is not officially a sign at all, it escapes censorship. We read in it the mind of its author and the fate of its victim. A trap and its thoughtless cruelty speaks the truth. An arrow trap indeed signifies the bloody sin which is to follow. It gives away its deadly intentions without shame or excuses. Seen as material signs, traps reveal the habits of the future prey as much as the needs and limits of the hunters. A trap always gives secrets away. It exposes the needs and weaknesses of its creator, but it also takes advantage of the anatomy and behavior of prey. We would like to argue that the mirror trap is just the same. It subtly points at the inabilities of its prey as well as of its creator. Like any other trap, The presence of the mirror signifies an absence that binds the allure of mirroring with the victim's need. However, unlike other traps, the basic force that drives or pulls the victim to its entrapment is not pragmatic, but rather epistemic. The human animal falls in the mirror trap not in order to feed its stomach, but rather in order to fulfill a different kind of existential need. It is not hunger for food, but humans' habitual quest for identity and self-knowledge that binds, aligns, and entangles bodies and mirrors. The mirror is a trap we set for answers. It exhumes question marks about who are we, what we look like, how we appear in the eye of the other. The mirror trap works because it tricks us to think that we can acquire that knowledge at a glance. The problem is, however, that what we recognize as ourself in front of the mirror is an intangible image, a situational affordance in the Gibsonian sense of light and glass that mimics our movement. We are not an image, nor are we made in the image of anything. Thus, self-awareness is not always guaranteed on the mirror surface. Still, in our effort to find our self-reflection, we get caught into the looking glass. We are captured in the mirror, not because we are naive, but because we are curious. Most of all, the reason we fall in the mirror trap is because we don't see it as a trap. We do not feel anything like prey. Alfred Gell offers the example of the hippopotamus that you see in the slide now to illustrate the sense of false security that leads prey to its trap. Confident of its sheer strength and bulk, the hippopotamus disregards a rope blocking its way. The hunter, counting on that attitude, had the rope connected to a little device with a sharp, pointy end hanging from the branch of a tree. The scenario embodied in the trap is easy to read. The hippopotamus will walk across in defiance, cut the rope, and release the deadly device on its head. As Gell nicely points out, and I quote, "The fact that animals who fall victim to traps have always brought about their downfall by their own actions, their own complacent and self-confidence, ensure that trapping is a far more poetic and tragic form of hunting than the simple chase." So, returning to the case of mirrors and humans, is it really our fault to be attracted by our own image and be lured into the mirror trap? Throughout development and human evolution, the promise of self-identification has proven to be an irresistible bait. We humans are almost habitually compelled to self-recognition. We are attracted to self-reflection as a mouse is compelled to get the cheese in the mousetrap. It is, however, hard to admit our entrapment. As it is, the mirror trap has come to feel like home. Understandably, our discussion of traps, hunters, and prey may seem strange, perhaps far removed from our ordinary life in the modern contemporary world. Yet we want to argue that during our everyday engagement with our mirror self-image, we still can assume those roles. We can be the hunter, the predator, but also the prey. Not only the mirror has the potential to capture us, using as bait our own self-image, it is also becoming all the more evident that the contemporary egocentric consumer can't get enough of it. Our modern capitalist society, as Susan Sontag remarks, feeds on images. The freedom to consume a plurality of images and goods is equated with freedom itself. The narrowing of free political choice to free economic consumption requires the unlimited production and consumption of images. The management of image and self is equated with freedom itself. As we said before, The idea is not to give up looking at the mirror. Rather, it is to find a balance. The relationship between self and mirror self can become greedy, as in the case of obsessive selfies that Danae discussed before, or burdened with social stereotypes about self-image as a commodity for consumption. When that happens, it can end up consuming our sense of self instead of building it. Instead of symbiotic, our relationship with the mirror might become predatory. On the other hand, the mirror can also be a healing tool used for caring for self and the other. The same affordances and semiotic properties that make the mirror dangerous and potentially harmful can also be used therapeutically. For the last part of the presentation, I will be focusing on the therapeutic aspect of mirror gazing. The use of mirror therapy to treat phantom limb pain in amputees is a very good example, case in point. The term phantom pain denotes in medical literature the feeling of pain experienced by an individual concerning a part of his or her body, usually a limb, which is no longer present due to amputation. The basic mirror technique for treating phantom pain is simple and non-invasive. A portable glass mirror is vertically placed on a table and aligned with the participant's mid-sagittal plane. Participants place their intact hand in front of the mirror and their amputated limb behind the mirror. Then they perform movements of the intact limb while looking into the mirror. The mirror technique often incorporates a simple virtual reality box that helps amputees to experience illusionary voluntary movement in the phantom limb in order to alleviate the pain and discomfort, as you can see in the image. The roof of the box has been removed and the two holes are crafted on its front. The patient is told to insert both his or her healthy arm and her phantom arm in the box through the holes. The mirror immediately creates the illusion that the patient is now looking at two arms. In reality, the patient only observes the healthy arm and the reflection of that arm, while the absence of the amputated arm is hidden behind the mirror. The patient is then asked to move the healthy arm and observe the reflection of the arm in the mirror. This in turn creates the illusion that both arms obey the patient's motor commands and perform mirror symmetric movements. According to Ramachandran, who is one of the neurologists who have pioneered this technique, for some patients, it is as if the phantom hand has been resurrected. The illusion is so powerful that people often report feeling as if their phantom placed behind the mirror has come alive. It feels like that. What they actually see objectively is their hand's reflection inside the mirror, but what they perceive and experience subjectively is seeing through the mirror surface as though it were actually transparent. The stronger the feeler perceives the presence of the missing limb, the best the results. There are two major explanations about why that happens. One is that the mirror exploits the brain predilection for prioritizing visual feedback over somatosensory feedback concerning limb positions. Another explanation is that the mirror provides a visual means to contradict pain. As Ramachandran observes, and I quote, "Ordinarily, the patient feels intense pain in an arm he cannot see, his phantom. Since nothing is seen or felt other than the pain, then there is nothing directly contradicting it. Even though patients may recognize that their phantom pain cannot be real, given that their phantom limb is not real, this recognition does not seem to reduce pain. Pain is usually immune to the powers of the intellect. Pain is reduced only when the power of contradiction comes into play by technical means, namely the use of the mirror. It is the experience of seeing through the mirror surface that allows the patient brain to realize that there is no external object causing the pain in the optically resurrected phantom, thus rejecting the pain signal as inauthentic. The mirror image of the second moving hand acquires material agency, turning an optical illusion into a possibility of healing. To continue our thinking along those lines about the complexity of mirror gazing, we can also look at another condition called mirror agnosium. In this condition, the person seems to believe that the mirrored image is real, not a reflection, and that real objects are inside the mirror or behind the mirror. When people with this condition are asked to localize and grasp an object reflected in the mirror, instead of looking for the original object in its real place, they try repeatedly to grasp the object inside the mirror. Paradoxically, such persons are clearly able to recognize the mirror as an object. They know what mirror is and does, they identify the frame and the glass of the mirror, and know that they look at it. Yet, they seem unable to use that knowledge when interacting with mirrors, as if they are locked inside the looking glass. The so-called mirror sign is another characteristic form of mirror agnosium. Patients are now able to identify the real location of the reflected objects as coming from behind, as well as to recognize other people's reflections in the mirror, and to recognize but are unable, to recognize one's own mirror reflection. Instead of seeing one's reflection in the mirror, what they see is a stranger. Now, of course, when we are not suffering from any of those conditions, we have every good reason to assume that there is a self, our self, which is inseparably linked with that body we see in the mirror. But how do we know that? How do I know the person I see in the mirror is really me? Usually, we assume it is our body that we see in the mirror because it looks like we do, moves when we move, and we see it being touched when we touch ourselves. However, as we discussed before, all those basic sensations can be challenged, leading to various forms of mirrored self-misidentification associated with the delusional belief that one's reflection in the mirror is a stranger. We believe that those occasions of embedment and mental disruption, strange and profoundly troubling as they may be, or they may seem to be for the patients involved, offer us the equivalent of a borderless mirror. That is, a mirror that invites and allows exactly the kind of abnormal exchange or participation that normal, modern people are usually denied in their daily encounters with the looking glass. Our ways of seeing are not given or fixed. Seeing is an act of creation more than it is a mental representation. Meaning and self-awareness are not guaranteed on the mirror surface. In spite of the repetitive character of our everyday ritual of mirror gazing, coming to terms with our ever-changing image is not always successful. We need to embrace this uncertainty. To remember is also to forget. Perhaps sometimes the healthy thing to do is to gaze at our mirrored face from a state of amnesia, as if we know or remember nothing about it. Doing so, we allow ourselves to become. We let the mirror do its magic. When that happens, our phantom self becomes alive. The mirror has to succumb to the change as well. It has to hide itself. In order for our gaze to become flexible, the mirror should give up something of its rigidity. To see through an object, the object must somehow cease to be an object. That is, it must lose its objecthood and turn into a process. In that sense, mirroring becomes thinking, an act of thinking and feeling with and through the mirror. The mirror opens up its borders. The mirror, however, rarely becomes transparent on its own. Seeing through or beyond the mirror is the product of enskillment. Reality is hard to see with naked eyes. Our imagination should also be recruited. But imagination here does not denote the kind of mental imaging that happens when the world is not present, or when the body is sleeping. Imagination here is enactive. It denotes the kind of material imagination that helps us see with and through the mirror. Unfortunately, mirror looking, as it is practiced in our modern cultures, is deprived of this material imagination. Therefore, to us, the mirror surface remains impermeable. And so, one way or another, the mirror fails us. It fails because no bridge is established between mirroring and imagining. More accurately, though, it is our gaze that fails. This lack of imaginative engagement through and with the mirror often renders it an uneventful and oppressive device. Yet by no means this is the only way or the natural way to look at the mirror. As young children with innocent eyes, we used to look through the mirror. Probably it took us only a couple of days to learn that there is nothing to reach and grab for other than a solid reflective surface. We learned to take a different perceptual stance towards the mirror, to look at the mirror rather than through it. Unlearning that perceptual habit is not easy. The experience of transparency is lost in the adult modern world. We no longer remember how to look through the mirror. We cannot even imagine what it feels like to do so. In those rare occasions that the experience of transparency returns, it is no longer a sign of playfulness, an active discovery and re-enchantment, but of mental impairment, as with the case of mirror agnosia we discussed before. We believe that retaining or rediscovering the ability to look through the mirror is possible and can be also therapeutic. We are gesturing towards a new kind of mirror exposure, one that promotes a therapeutic alliance between self and the mirror. This alliance is comparable to the relation between the hunter and the prey we mentioned before when we discussed the mirror as a trap. Looking through the mirror demands that in our engagement with the mirror, we abandon the gaze of prey and adopt the gaze of the hunter. Prey usually sees whatever the hunter intends. The hunter knows the needs of the prey and so is able to manipulate its behavior and movements. In our own visual culture that feed on self-images, our own movements often lead in front of the mirror, traditional or digital. Standing there, our self-need grows. We have to strike a balance. Living life in front of the mirror is to exhaust the relationship with oneself. The philosopher Mr. Foucault remarked in an interview in 1984 that the main important duty of philosophy is its critical function. He defines this function essentially as, in a quote, the challenging of all phenomena of domination at whatever level or under whatever form they present themselves, political, economic, sexual, institutional, and so on. The critical function of philosophy up to a certain point emerges right from the Socratic imperative. Be concerned with yourself, namely ground yourself in liberty through the mastery of self. So one way, if you want, that we can speak of that balance is like using the term critical mirroring. That is mirroring for self-critical, for critical self-consciousness. This is the consciousness that one develops only by adopting the gaze of the hunter. We believe that some of the strangest but also interesting things in human life can be understood as relations between hunter and prey. In our book, Adopting the Metaphor of the Mirror as Trap, we have tried to situate and explore the logic of mirroring in its broadest sense, within the relevant anthropological discussion of the complex relations between hunters and prey. We argue that humans can approach and engage with the mirror both as hunters and prey. All living creatures are potentially prey of one form or another. Only few of them will ever become hunters. Being a prey is natural. Being a hunter demands a great deal of skill. We may think of certain animals as natural predators, but a predator is not a hunter. An act of predation is essentially about location, mutilation, and destruction of prey. An act of hunting, by contrast, is dialogical and participatory. It is a social act, a coming together. A predator primarily kills. A hunter, by contrast, collects, relates, and participates. This is why becoming a hunter presupposes the ability to become a prey. The two roles are inseparable. The relationship is one of reciprocity, alliance, and sympathy. The remaking of gaze is part of a broader strategy for transforming our ecology of perception, our ways of seeing and of thinking inside the world. That move presupposes a great deal of unlearning. But a hunter is nothing if not flexible and inventive. The gaze of the hunter refers to an ability to see the world differently. In the case of mirror gazing, that means seeing the self-reflection differently. The gaze of the hunter is an invitation to see the mirror's enchantment and not just its glass, to find oneself in the mirror, but also in the mirror's depth. Acquiring such a gaze means that we do not exhaust our relationship with our image. The gaze of the hunter is open to possibilities, subject to constant change and re-evaluation. Crucially, the gaze of the hunter touches on the mirror lightly, as it does also on the world. The effected transformation is worth the effort. The mirror opens up to new possibilities of participatory sense-making and attentive engagement. A new ecology of mirroring thus emerges, one in which our most deeply entrenched recollections, projections, and anticipations can be challenged, and where mimesis can be exchanged for critical self-consciousness. Thank you very much. I guess we need to stop here.
So, thank you very much, Lambros. Thank you very much, Danae. I have a bit of echo in my voice. I don't know if you can turn your microphone off while we are just okay. Thank you. So since I have to go for 5 minutes, but then I come back, it will be Sean that will lead and will chair the discussion. But I'll be back in 5 minutes. But so I wanted, if I may, just ask the first questions in order to break the ice, if Sean allows me to do that. Sure. Before going. So first of all, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. There are so many topics, so maybe I pick up just a minor one, but it can be challenging in some way, or maybe not. I wanted to know what you think about it. I really appreciated the idea that in some the relationship between the hunter and the prey in some way, and it's something that the mirror works like that, like it cheats us in some way. It has something like that, and it does though in a very deep way that to me. It challenged a bit also the Umberto Eco's idea that is not a sign that it does not work like that and all that, because it cheats us from the very beginning. For instance, the majority of the people think that the mirror turns the right into left, which is not true at all. If we ask people, I think that the majority of people think that that you have this kind of inversion, which is not. You have this kind of inversion because you take the point of view of the people in the mirror, of the other one that is in the mirror. But if you stick to your own point of view, the mirror does not invert the right with the left in any way. So I was thinking, Lambros, about what you were telling. We can think that there is a kind of primary intersubjectivity in the relationship of the mirror, that it leads us to take the point of view of the other as the first thing that we do, even before all the wonderful thing that you were telling in some way. And in this, I would say, you would accept to think this kind of projection or from the point of view of ourselves to the point of view of the image in the mirror as a form of imagination, at least in the David Kirsch idea of a projection of yourself into something other that in some way changes or keep a form of relations. So there is a kind of proto-imagination in this kind of projection. This was just a minor thing, but it's something that has always fascinated me.
Yeah, thanks, Claudio. I'm not sure what your exact question was about, but I imagine that you want me to think about imagination and projection in relation to the mirror. And what
exactly.
that can tell us in terms of these signifying properties.
Exactly.
First of all, there are two or three things we need to differentiate to get some sense of that. We have the mirror as a material object with certain affordances, and those affordances of that object for me are primarily perceptual. And by that I mean that the first interaction you are going to have with the mirror, whether you are a human being or another animal capable of that kind of interaction, is going to be perceptual based experiences. And in that sense also, you need to understand that where I come from my own way of thinking about material objects, I see the mirror as an active player into this interaction, meaning it's not for me something neutral, it's not an external object that you are going to use in this or the other way. It is something you interact in a symmetrical way, meaning it has agency and gives you agency, and you have agency and gives that object some agency. And in my view, this is exactly what is happening if we are going. This is something we are not really discussing in the book, but I'm hoping to publish something on that with Danae soon, separately. This is what is happening in the context of those experiments in developmental psychology or in animal comparative psychology, where you have the mirror as a testing device, meaning a lot of people in psychology have been using the mirror test, disregarding completely the affordances of the object itself, and assuming that is a neutral device, that it can be used as a testing device, meaning that whether you are going to pass or not the mirror test, that tells you your capabilities in terms of self-recognition or self-consciousness. I mean, there are different definitions there and different understandings of the terms. And my view has been on that, and I guess I'm very, perhaps a minority on thinking like that, but I do that. I can think like that because of the view I have about material agency and the importance of materiality in how they structure ordinary experience and phenomenon. Is that the mirror already is what allows you to develop the self-recognition that you see. So you're not really testing an innate property, you see a construction. Do you see something that happens because the mirror is there for you to interact? And this is why you're going to see a lot of interesting difference between what happens in a control environment of a laboratory, let's say, versus a natural environment. And nowadays there have been some very interesting studies that were placing mirrors on natural habitat and exploring the chimpanzees' reaction there. And they have been struggling to find those immediate association with self-recognition in terms of self-consciousness that you see in some of the early studies. So basically the point I'm trying to make is that the mirror, seeing the mirror in terms of its situational affordances in the ecology, the cognitive ecology that surrounds that artifact, will have certain effects on you, mostly related with your self-recognition. If you are an animal, based on vision to do this kind of recognition, because another animal might use smell, so you don't really need to look at the mirror. You can smell and you can recognize, and you develop that, if you want, level of more developed consciousness by means of all the senses. But when it comes to the mirror, to mirror interaction, the mirror itself matters, and I think it plays an important role in those experiences. That, in a way, covers the basic, if you want, level of what the mirror does. And I use that example simply because I know that a lot of people are familiar with this literature from developmental and comparative cognition. Now, to what extent projection comes into play and what we mean by projection, that's a slightly more complicated issue. Mainly because my understanding of cognition, as it is also of imagination and also of representation, is externalist in the anthropological sense, meaning that a lot of people in enactivism will deny, for instance, the importance of representation, that they do very well when it comes to the human brain, or the way that traditional cognitive science is defining those representations. But from an anthropological perspective and the semiotics of material culture, you know, representation is happening all the time and probably provides the model upon which we have, if you want, the model that we use to make sense of the internal reality. So because they work so well on the outside world, we immediately thought, oh, that's a very good example to think about cognition. But we are talking about two very, very different things, because what happens on the outside world is you have a body engaging that world. So you have a different, first of all, situation in the pragmatic sense, in the sense that Dewey will be using the term. So you have this organism-environment relationship, which takes a semiotic also dimension, but which speaks about this inseparability of a living organism inside an environment. And then the question for us is to see what is the environment and what is the organism, because the two are complexly intermingled in the course of life and development. And the mirror, thus, is an environment for me, is a material environment. And in that sense, it can be used, if you want, in the Gibsonian basic sense of affordances, but also in the more, in my view, elaborate form of affordances that comes by way of material imagination, projection, and what I call an active signification. I hope I didn't confuse you more than I help you.
It was very clear, so thank you for this deepening of the problem. So it was. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Lambros and Danae. Can I ask you to turn off your screen sharing or the PowerPoint? That way I might be able to see more of the people here and that they have questions. There is a question from, I don't know the first name, M. Menegheli. Just turn your audio on and ask your question.
Thank you, Professor Gallagher. My name is Marco Menegheli, as Mark in English. I apologize for all my English mistakes. I am a little bit not enough useful with it, but I will try to improve my English, even talking in these spectacular and particular conferences. I have listened to the two talks. In particular, I would like to make a question to Lambros Malafouris that has stimulated me very much. His talk. We can see Mirror there is a book that entitled Philosophy as a Mirror of Nature. An American philosopher, I think, maybe Rorty, but I don't remember exactly. But the mirror is a concept, a philosophical concept, a fundamental philosophical concept for all the history of philosophy, and not only of Greek philosophy. But if we think about Paul of Tarso, in Latin, he said, videmus nunc per speculum et enigmate. Nunc tunc facem ad facem. Now we see, we watch through mirror and in enigma, in the riddle. That is very Persian, this statement by Paul, and very semiotical. I agree with Lambros with the fact that I don't agree totally with Umberto Eco and his essay on mirrors and other essays, because Umberto Eco states that mirror is not a sign. This is his thesis in this essay. Mirror is always not a sign. Signs are not mirrors, and mirrors are not signs. I don't agree because if you use a mirror in a meta mirror, we can use a mirror as a sign. But I think that the foundation, the same foundation of semiotics is the mirror, and so we go to some Lacanian and Freudian inspirations and suggestions about narcissism, and the fact that if we look us in the mirror, we recognize us, and because we are symmetric, we have two hands, two eyes, normally, usually, that we call normal people, normal human person, but nothing is normal, I think. Everything is different, but we are all different, but statistically we are symmetric. We are double. Everything is double. So the mirror is the mirror of symmetry, of our symmetry. William Blake in The Tiger speaks about in his wonderful poetry the fearful symmetry of tiger. So hunter, maybe mind hunter, better be hunters than predators. I agree totally. Hunter is a sort of researcher, even. The hunting, but we say, and I conclude, we can say that man is a mirror maker. Is the mirror maker differently with the other animals. No animal make mirror as make human, and very often men make traps, mirror as traps, to capture other animals. Every trap is oriented to some victim or someone. In Italian we say the specchietti per allodole. I have tried to translate in English this syntagma. Now I have pointed it, but I a mirror for lightard, some kind of birds. There are mirror for lions. There are mirror, but very often men make mirrors for himself. Mirror is a sort of cure, but when this became pathological, when man recursively see himself in the mirror in a narcissistic pathological way, mirror is not used as mirror, but as something other. Not as a sign, but as an infinite and bad infinity. So men have to remember, in a Platonic and Socratic sense, that nature is his mirror, and mirror is only a mirror. We are used to use mirror, so for example, to see if our bird or hair or eyes or everything of us pertain our face, for example, as a mirror. I have maybe to raid my beard. Sorry for my long beard and long intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Son, I cannot hear you. I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, my
just
mic's up. All right. Did you want to respond to this, or shall we go to the next question?
I don't think there was a question. I mean, there are a lot of interesting comments. I agree with some of them. I mean, we can discuss others. If you just want a comment, I might say something in relation to the last nature mirror statement, that that could be thought of in many different ways. But perhaps when it comes to the mirror itself and the mirror gazing that we were discussing here, we should not forget that so far as evolution is concerned, we have developed a way of seeing that is not allowing us to see our face. What I'm trying to say is that the mirror is unnatural in that respect, in the evolutionary sense. We are doing something which we should not be doing in the first place, meaning being able to see our face. And this is what you can do with the mirror glass. And I think that's an interesting point here.
Okay, Luigi Lavacaro has a question.
Hi, and thanks for your talk. I found it really interesting and inspiring. I have a question for you both. In the talk, you cite Umberto Eco's essay on the mirrors, and I have the impression that on some points you agree with Eco positions. On other points, like the truth of the mirror image, you disagree because you say that the mirrors always lie. I'm really curious about what do you think of Eco's essay general stance, that is that the mirror image is absolutely not a sign. And another thing, after Eco's claim, in the semiotic field, an important debate arose. Some people sustain that a mirror image is not a sign, and others, like Goran Sonesson, said that the mirror image is a sign. After some years, the debate ended without a solution. Do you think that your ideas can open again this debate with a different perspective, for example, using the categories of an active sign for the mirror image?
Thank you, Luigi. This is, in my view, a complex semiotic issue and debate for many people. I can see why you insist on that. I will not pretend that I do have a clear position in terms of what is Eco exactly was saying when he was making that statement about that the mirror is no sign, and how that debate has been developed in the context of that conversation. I don't want to give you a clear position, mainly because I come from a very different perspective and discipline. I mean, my approach to mirror gazing has been mainly anthropological, and that means that I have been exploring that in many different contexts and in ways that do not necessarily operate on the basis that you take for granted when you start thinking about the semiotic properties of the mirror. And when you do that, and when you recognize also the mirror as a material performative device, a lot of things are changing. I think that if Umberto Eco was to discuss on that basis about mirror a sign or not. Perhaps he could give you different ideas about how that can be seen, how the mirror can be seen to operate semiotically. But then the whole discussion is going to be based on concepts that have different meanings than the meanings that people in semiotics usually take for granted when they discuss those problems. Anthropology and cognitive archaeology especially prioritize people and things. And we try to prioritize that in a very situated and comparative way, avoiding or not allowing the abstraction, the analytical abstraction, to take the lead. And that works well for anthropology. I mean, that is what anthropology and archaeology should be doing, to look at the mind, if you want to look at the semiotics from a material culture perspective. I'm not saying that this is necessarily a better approach. I'm just telling you that coming from that different perspective, you see things in a very different way. And I might be using, for instance, the word representation, but I mean, it can mean so different things for different people that sometimes even discussion on that is very, very hard. I mean, very often in neuroscience, for instance, people will be using term representation referring to basically neural activation patterns, which no one denies that the brain is active and you can find those patterns. But the implication of representation in the context of another discussion about mental structures and cognitive is very, very different. And you should not be conflating the two. And the same applies for external representation by way of material science. And this is how I see the mirror. Now, the mirror is not just this basic reflection, it's way more than just a reflection. And in my view, as I said before, developmentally speaking, the mirror does a lot of interesting things, which people are not always able to notice simply because they see that as a neutral, as a part of the neutral environment of an experimental setting that is never allowed to play any role in the experiment that you do. Okay, so that's the whole idea. If you are in developmental psychology and you use toys or a banana or whatever, the assumption is that those objects do not matter. They cannot matter. If they do matter, then your experiment is destroyed. What you use them to bring out the interesting stuff that matters and which are elsewhere. But in my view, objects do matter. And thus the mirror does a lot of interesting things, also semiotically. But if you look at that in very real life settings, this is where the mirror can become a sign. If you take it out of this real life setting, then perhaps it's not a sign, is something that has very little value semiotically. So those distinctions that perhaps are not the kind of distinction that you use in philosophy or semiotics are quite important from where I come from and the way I see that. So yeah, that's probably my answer to it. Thank you very much.
Danae?
Yeah. Yes, that was a very interesting question. I do not have anything to add to what Lambros said about the mirror being a sign or not, because it's very confusing. Just want to add to this complexity by saying something about the quote that you use about the truth that we see in the mirror. We refer to an experiment that the mirror does not give us the real size that we see, but apart from that, in our book, we refer also to art, popular culture as to find some underlying patterns of the human experience of what it is to look in the mirror. So we juxtapose this quote. We can juxtapose it with a poem of Sylvia Plath. It's a very famous one, and it is called The Fish. And it's about an old, we assume to be an old lady looking in the mirror and seeing a young girl drowning, and in her place, a terrible fish arising from the depths. So this poem, we have the mirror speaking in the first person, saying that I'm accurate, I'm silver and exact. What you see in me is the truth, is what you get. But the way that this lady interprets Sylvia Plath interprets her mirror image as she ages as a terrible fish is nothing but the truth, is nothing but what is not what she sees in the mirror. So my point is that we see the image, but we also interpret that image making our own personal narratives. So while the mirror does present her true image, in her mind, she sees her image fading, and in the place of her image, she's seeing a terrible fish appearing from the depths of a very frightening lake. So this is why it is very interesting to see how we can interpret in our mind the mirror image and how we can think and how it alters and affects what we think about ourselves because of the stereotypes that we have already in our minds of what is beautiful, what is not, and what we are afraid of. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you so much. This makes me a lot.
And if I can make a comment about the previous question by Mr. Menengeli, I think it was. I very much like that he brought the Blake's tiger into question. I've never thought of that, about the tiger's fearful symmetry that Blake refers to in the poem. And I really appreciate the idea of how the mirror doubles and how we have this symmetry in nature. And at one point, the gentleman referred to Narcissus. And in the book, we dedicate a part of that because it's a very, very good example of the mirror as trap. Because as he said, the mirror can turn into something else. And in the case of Narcissus, that if you know the myth, it was a very young and beautiful man who saw his reflection at the lake. And because he was so beautiful, he fell in love with that reflection, so much so that he remained there until he died, actually, because of grief, because he could not touch that reflection. And so this is the case of the mirror in nature, the mirroring, the mirror reflection, turning into a very deadly trap when we can lose ourselves instead of finding it. And that's what I wanted to point out.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for your intervention and your answer, beautiful answer.
Really enjoyed
I think that we have to mirror in nature, not in nature as to be a sort of mirror,
yes,
even of human nature. Thank you very much.
Exactly. Really enjoyed Blake's tiger. I will think about that. Thank you.
Thank you too. You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Martina Baccaro has a question.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, professors, both for your interventions. I really appreciate and find them very interesting. The question I would like to ask is about the role of intersubjectivity in the process of mirror self-recognition, and considering also what Rochat in that article from 2001 cited before said about the importance of interactions between the infant in the developmental phase and the caregiver in front of the mirror. So precisely, I would like to ask if you do you think that we can speak about that shared experience in front of the mirror like a participative material engagement that occurs between infant and caregiver in mirror self-recognition process, and moreover, if this relationship is detectable also in other culture, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you for this question. I want to clarify something on what you're asking us. Are you referring to the interaction between the child and the mirror, or the interaction between the child and the carer or the experimenter in front of the mirror? I mean, I'm trying to understand your where you situate your intersubjectivity in that sense.
I'm referring to the experience in which the infant in the mirror self-recognition process engage the mirror with the caregiver, that could be the mother or the father or other persons in a daily life. So if we can speak about this experience as like something that is resemble to a material engagement that is shared between more than one people, more than two people, maybe also.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, as with any other form of interaction, because mirror gazing is one example of the kind of interaction that you get with a material object in this example, but we do also interact with others, and by that we mean the human other. Okay, then both kind of interactions, both the human to mirror interaction, but also the human to human interaction, are forms of what I at least refer as material engagement. And I use the term material engagement because I'm trying to prioritize the materiality of that practice, which for me comes at a very early stage and in many ways and in different ways facilitates the developmental process. That can be in terms of a scaffolding, which in the case of mirror we might call a perceptual scaffolding. Of course, the scaffolding metaphor is offering you, as if you want one specific set of affordances. The scaffold is something that helps you and then withdraws. We can think of other ways to express that beyond the metaphor of the scaffold. But the important thing, in my view, is to understand and to pay attention to those interactions as having an important role into the intersubjective experience, if we can call it that way. I think there is a preference, especially among developmental psychologists, and to some extent also in philosophy, at least for the people who are engaging with this kind of work, to think about those interactions only using an understanding of the social which has room only for human interaction. So you will see a lot of research in terms of how the child interacts with the carer or the mother or the father or the experimenter or children playing, but very little discussion in terms of how the material environment is structuring and actually in some cases even providing the very basis of that interaction. The classical example would be someone like Tomasello, for instance, who is using this notion of we or collective intentionality as a joint intentionality, as a we, and he speaks of dyadic and triadic interactions, but both the triadic and the triadic interaction in Tomasello's schemes is about human interaction. So the object somehow circulates, but it doesn't play any important role. And I'm just trying to argue here that if you look more carefully at all those studies and all those experiments, you will see that there is always an object involved. There is always a material environment that actually structures and facilitates those interactions. And the same, exactly the same logic I apply in the case of mirrors and mirror gazing when it comes to those developmental issues. So I just see a more active, if you want, role coming from the side of the mirror in allowing you to see your movement and to interact in different ways with what you see in front of you, and eventually discovering that what you see in front of you is conspecific. I mean, human in the case of children, but as I said before, there are also a lot of examples of animals interacting with mirrors, and a lot of literature on self-recognition in animals using the mirror test as the prime methodology. So put it simply, intersubjectivity for me is not only between humans, but also between humans and things. And I see that relationship as a social relationship. And I do feel that if you look at early human evolution, but also from an anthropological perspective, hunter-gatherer societies, and if you adopt this ecological way of thinking about participation and living in the world, this kind of ecology is always social. So the way you relate with your environment is never ecological in the sense that some people use the term that is environmental. It's not. It's a social relationship. It's a very rich relationship. And very often it's hard to separate the human from the non-human because they form an inseparable whole. And this is, for me, the source of intersubjectivity, because this is where, all those exchanges that will culminate at some point with the gift, if you want, which for me is the best example you can think about social interaction, comes into the picture. So I hope that somehow answers.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Danae, do you want to add anything or join in?
I think Martina asked something about the ways people look in the mirror in different cultures. Is that correct?
Yes, I was. Sorry.
No.
Yes, I was asking about the same question on the developmental process of mirror self-recognition. If there is some relation between the infant that look at the mirror and develops the ability to recognize herself in the mirror with the interaction that the infants have with the caregiver. So if in other cultures maybe we have the same kind of a relation and the caregiver make the role, assume the role of scaffolding this process, like Rocha said in that article from 2001.
Yes, well, we have this developmental psychology idea like Lacan with the mirror stage, where the babies recognize themselves in the eyes of the caring eyes of the mother. Or we have Freud, who said that he watched his grandchildren engage into game of losses, which is the one was when they look themselves in the mirror, and the other was when they realized that what they see in the mirror is not a playmate. But I just wanted to, and Lambros completely covered, I think, the issue. I just wanted to say that in other cultures, people do not even look in the mirror. For instance, in Mongolia, there is an amazing kind of mirror, which is called the toli. And this is the shamanic mirror, which is supposed to be a portal to the world of the dead. But even in the common household mirror, people are very much afraid to look at the reflections in it. And as we learned from anthropologist Humphrey, who did a wonderful job in that place, they do not allow their children to look in the mirror. And that is because they believe that they will see things because they are still very young that adults cannot see, and that is the world of the dead. So the household mirror is placed actually very, very up on the wall so that you cannot see your face in it, but it's just for luminosity and to give light to the surrounding items, which is usually photographs of relatives and precious household objects like that. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And in terms of mirror gazing, they do not, even adults, they look themselves very briefly in the mirror, and they have very small hand mirrors for that, never a big one. And they are grooming themselves very in a hurry. So because mirror gazing, as I said, is dangerous because you can look to this other reality that only someone's may look in it. So the mirror is actually a very dangerous object, especially for very young children.
Thank you, very interesting.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, I don't see any other electronic hands up, so I'll ask a question if you don't mind. So Danae, in your presentation, you I think you pointed out rightly that we don't remember our mirror image.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's certainly true in an explicit way. But I wonder, shouldn't we say something like that to some extent, we maybe learn from the mirror something about our body image. It somehow or other enters into our image of ourselves, and in that sense, we might carry it around with us, or it might enter into some kind of memory, maybe not explicit memory. What would you think of that?
Yes, this is very interesting. Thank you, Sean. Of course, we get an idea of who we are, and we have this knowledge of our image. But as an instance, as it's a very natural occurrence, it's not something that we tend to remember. We have a vague idea of how we look like, and this is something that stays with us. But we do not remember the actual engagement as we remember, let's say, when we look at a photograph, and so we can very clearly see it in our head because it's a photograph. And this is what I say, that the image carries no memory. Of course, there is now the mirror selfie, which is another thing where the mirror takes the mirror image, invades photography, and so we have a very clear memory of it, and you can also exhibit it, share it, and circulate it. But what you see in the mirror as such, I don't think that it attaches itself to memory. Of course it does, but not in the way that other self-images do, like a portrait or a film that you made and you remember yourself in it. So comparatively, I think it carries very little memory in it. I don't know if Lambros, you want to add something about that.
No, I agree with what you said. I do. I mean, I have myself, Son, been thinking about that a lot because I do feel that there is something strange when it comes to memory and mirroring. There is an obvious difference with other media and other forms of representations. As you said, also, of course, I mean, given the impact it has in our developmental life history, we tend to assume that we carry memories of our interactions with mirrors. Although, to be honest with you, I haven't so far been able to find one person who can tell me or remember even the first time that saw his or her face in the mirror. Perhaps that, of course, someone would say that that happens at a very young age. We don't have a lot of memory, but even later on, I mean, that's not the kind of memory that people tend to associate. Although it must have been a very, as I said, and very good indication that it is a very powerful moment. The moment of self-recognition should have a huge impact in our, if you want, as a memory trace. And it's not. It seems strange. I don't think, and I cannot offer a proper explanation. I just can say, if you want, from a more anthropological perspective, that is a very interesting difference when it comes to memory, when it comes to representation in those media, because usually all the other forms of at least external representation are, explicitly associated with memory functions. And the mirroring seems to be a very interesting, if you want, a diversion, which of course has to do with the fact that it's not, it's for the moment, and it's it happens at the moment of co-occurrence and then disappears. There is no storage, if you want, of any kind, and that perhaps means that the organism, then the human needs to store everything, and if memory is not about storage, then we are having a problem. And in my view, memory is not necessarily about storage, it's about affordances and discovery of those affordances, and that perhaps makes the mirror very slippery. That's all the wisdom I can offer on the precise question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't see any other electronic hands up. If someone does have a question, just turn your video on and you can signal me virtually. And if I don't see anything, I do have one other question I can pose, and that is about the mirror trap. Lambros, you were talking about the mirror trap, and I guess my question was something like, who is it that sets the mirror trap? You know, who would be the hunter in this scenario?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. The mirror trap is, of course, a metaphor, and it's not a metaphor in the sense of having no significance or impact. It's a metaphor in terms of importance, in terms of structuring certain experiential aspects of our engagement with the mirrors. I think that society always holds the mirror. Now, the question for us is what we mean by society, because that's, again, an abstraction. I mean, what is that? It's not, is it an individual? It's not an individual. What do we mean by society holding a mirror and setting a trap for you? I think it's partly all the discussion and conversation that a lot of people are having, not only these days, but you know, it's an old conversation about consumerism, about individualism, about setting certain stereotypes, prototypes of self and how you should behave. It's about what we nowadays call the selfie. It's all this kind of new way of thinking about the individual for the sake of the individual, which the mirror serves really well, because it gives you a face, it gives you that reflection. And I think that this kind of individualism is what immediately transforms the mirror into a trap and holds us captive to it. It's not necessarily the person who is manufacturing the mirror as a real object. It is more of all those, if you want, social structures, if you can call them as such, or individuals, that are telling you how you should be looking and what you should be searching in your engagement with the mirror. And that brings into this discussion a lot of different issues. It's very difficult to put them together now in any simplified way. Advertisement works using that logic, and even contemporary media and digital culture is working following that logic. And that's a very big conversation, especially given what is happening these days with COVID and the situation and the environment we have found ourselves. But perhaps because of that, it is a very good opportunity to think more carefully and more critically about the image and about mirrorings of all sorts and all kinds, which are not neutral and very often embodied socio-political forces, invisible, which very often constrain and not necessarily in our own benefit. The way we think and the way we see and the way we interact with each other. I'm not sure if I answered, but you know, it is a very important, first of all, and very difficult question, which you know, I just want to. I offer we offer the metaphor of the mirror trap as a starting point for thinking around those issues, rather than a final explanation of what's happening.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, again, I don't see any questions. I don't know if Claudio is back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Do we have more time, or are we?
No, I think we can.
We're over 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, we can stop. It's almost 8:30, so people are hungry, so they need to.
Right. Okay, then. I guess we need to thank our speakers today, Lambros and Danae. Thank you very much for such an interesting, I mean, I think there's probably lots of interesting questions that could be asked. Yeah. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Claudio, for the invitation. Thank you, Son, and thank you, everybody else, for being here and your discussion, comments. And I'm looking forward to see you again very, very soon.
Yeah, we will do that.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Vittorio.
Bye-bye, Vittorio. Good to see you.
So, we can only, hi Dan, we can only just say that Vittorio will be the next.
Hi, Lambros.
Hello, Dan. Hi.
Hi. I was out by an hour because they changed the clocks. So
no worries. Yeah.
I got up at 4 a.m., but this starts at 3 a.m.
Oh my God! So
I know it's a whole another ballpark.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Okay, go back to